Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our event, Innovations in Equity in Spinal Cord Injury, Expert Insights and Perspectives. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Rhoda, and I'm a third year from Sam Houston State University College of Osteopathic Medicine. I'll be your host this evening alongside my classmate, Danyal Tahseen. We're excited to co-host this exciting discussion, which will honor, and we are honored to feature two exceptional leaders in spinal cord injury care, Dr. Felicia Skelton and Dr. Donna Huang. Both of these incredible physicians bring a wealth of expertise, innovation, and compassion to the field of rehabilitation medicine, and we are thrilled to have them here with us tonight. So before we start, we wanted to give a brief overview of this evening. First, we'll start with introductions of our distinguished speakers. Then we'll dive into a panel discussion that will explore their professional journeys, innovations in SCI care, and the barriers that they've worked to overcome in both their careers and in patient care. Afterward, we'll open the floor for an interactive Q&A session, so feel free to share your questions in the chat as we are going through the session, or we'll have time at the end to raise hands. Finally, we'll close with some key takeaways and final thoughts from our speakers. Without further ado, let's go ahead and introduce our speakers and learn more about their incredible contributions to spinal cord injury care. Danyal, would you like to start by introducing our first speaker, Dr. Felicia Skelton?
Absolutely. Thank you, Rhoda. Dr. Felicia Skelton is a spinal cord injury specialist and researcher at Baylor College of Medicine and the Michael E. DeBakey VA Medical Center. After earning her MD from Baylor, she completed her PM&R residency at the University of Washington and an SCI Medicine fellowship at Baylor. She also holds a master's in clinical investigation focusing on healthcare equality and innovations. Currently, Dr. Skelton is an associate professor whose research spans secondary conditions in SCI as well as antimicrobial stewardship and virtual reality interventions. Her dedication to advancing care is reflected by her leadership roles in professional organizations, including the Academy of Spinal Cord Injury Professionals and the Association of Academic Physiatrists. With a strong focus on improving health outcomes and promoting equity, Dr. Skelton's work has made a significant impact on SCI care and research. Now, let's cast a spotlight on another remarkable leader in SCI care, Dr. Donna Huang. Dr. Donna Huang is a spinal cord injury specialist and educator at Baylor College of Medicine and the Michael E. DeBakey VA Medical Center. After earning her MD from Baylor, Dr. Huang completed her residency in PM&R and a fellowship in SCI medicine at Harvard's Spaulding Rehabilitation Hospital. Currently, Dr. Huang serves as an assistant professor and associate residency program director in PM&R at Baylor. Her research focuses on improving outcomes for SCI patients, and her commitment to education has been recognized with the Faculty Award for Excellence. Dr. Donna Huang's history of active involvement in professional organizations like the Academy of Spinal Cord Injury Professionals and, of course, the Association of Academic Physiatrists, coupled with her compassionate approach to patient care, make her a true trailblazer in the field. Honored to have you both on board.
Alrighty. Thank you, Daniel, for sharing those incredible introductions. So let's see. Now that we've introduced our speakers, we'd love to hear directly from them. Dr. Skelton, could you start by telling us about your journey into spinal cord injury care? Kind of what drew you to this field and what keeps you inspired?
Sure. So good evening, everyone. Um, Man, it's been quite the journey. I've first heard about physical medicine and rehab when I was an undergrad. I was kind of going through doing all the things that pre-med students do, kind of checking off all the boxes, and I just was really kind of disillusioned with medicine in general. I had some kind of tough experiences, and I wasn't sure if this is what I wanted to do. And so I had a mentor that asked me had I'd ever heard of the Texas Institute of Rehabilitation and Research. And I was like, no, like that's a fake hospital. I've never heard of that hospital before in my life. What is that? And so he's like, go and look on their website. I think it's something you'd be interested in. And so I remember going and looking at that website and seeing a profile of a spinal cord injury medicine physician, seeing how it's like, okay, they work as a team. I was like, okay, I like that. They lead, it's an interdisciplinary team. All right, that's cool. The patient's at the center. Awesome. And you really get to kind of treat the whole patient. There's not an organ system that's not affected from spinal cord injury. And so I was like, oh, that's really neat. So I actually went into medical school thinking that that's what I wanted to do. Obviously, did rotations and got interested in it. Went off and did residency in Seattle, and just some of my favorite patients early on were patients that I took care of with spinal cord injuries and disorders. I definitely remember one gentleman I took care of. He had horrible scoliosis, and so had a very large, complicated spine surgery that resulted in incomplete tetraplegia after that. He was on a ventilator. And over the 3 months, that I was on this one rotation, just kind of watched him fight and work and do so much to get off of the ventilator, to get decannulated. And of course, as a lot of our patients, he was going back to middle of nowhere, Montana. And so like looking at the team kind of wrap their arms around him and figure out what they needed to do to kind of make that work and to do that safely. And I was like, oh, okay, that's really cool. So, wound up doing fellowship back at Baylor, and then the rest is history.
I think you're muted, Daniel.
Sorry, struggling to unmute. My bad. My internet just crapped out for a minute there, but I'm on my phone now. We're back. So yeah, I first of all just want to thank you guys for having me this evening. It's really exciting to get to interface with medical students and kind of talk about what it is we do. So in terms of how I came to spinal cord injury, when I was a medical student, I actually was kind of a chronically undecided person. I came into med school not really knowing what I wanted to do. I had a general idea, did clinical rotations, and was I kind of like everything, but I haven't found that thing that's it for me. And as I watched, so many of my students or of my fellow students just find their path, I was increasingly nervous. Third year began, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. And as a part of our med school curriculum at the time was a ambulatory care experience where we were kind of sent out into different places in and around the Houston community, to do site visits. And one of those sites was TIR, the Institute for Rehabilitation and Research. I realized, weirdly enough, our medical school at Baylor is literally right around the corner from TIR. So it had been down the street from me this whole time. But similar to Felicia, it was who is she? Does she go here? It's just been this building that I've been driving by for 3 years and didn't really know what was going on there. And I knew physical medicine and rehabilitation was a specialty, and I had only the vaguest idea of what they did. But at that visit, one of the spinal cord injury attendings gave a presentation about what PM&R is. And I was I think this is it. Because at the time I had been, toying with the idea of doing internal medicine, but I also really liked neurology. And I think what was kind of missing for me was I always found myself wondering well, what happens to these people? How does this event or medical condition kind of impact or affect their life in their context? I had a patient when I was on medicine who was hospitalized for 3 weeks after a CHF exacerbation, and then had kind of one complication after another, and needed various procedures and interventions. And then at the end of it, I was having a conversation with him where he was I work as a line cook in a kitchen, and I have to be on my feet all day, and I don't really know what I'm going to do because I can barely stand. And I was yeah, what happens to someone like that? What do we do? So yeah, I found PM&R as I was kind of wondering all of these things, and it just kind of clicked. And so then, went on to do residency, fellowship. In residency, kind of told myself I would keep an open mind, but I already had an idea that I liked spinal cord injury from my my elective rotations and sub-Is during med school. It just kind of combined the combination of I really enjoyed internal medicine, of course, heavy on neurology, but then spinal cord injury is just such an encompassing condition. Of course, physiologically, it affects our patients in a lot of ways, but then really socially, psychologically, it just kind of affects all aspects of people's lives, which I think I found really interesting and just sort of a rich experience to bear witness to, and to be kind of part of that process. I recently learned from a friend of mine that in family medicine, they have a term or a concept called accompaniment, which is the idea of like someone just sort of like being there with a patient through various kind of trials and tribulations. And I realize, that's a lot of what we do in spinal cord injury. And I think that's like something that I really enjoy, even though we're not able to like fix a lot of things, just kind of being in someone's corner during these various like events and trials in their life. So yeah.
Awesome. Thank you both for sharing your incredible journeys. It really is so inspiring to hear about the paths, how you arrived to that click that you talked about, Dr. Wong, and how you guys chose PM&R as the vehicle to sort of deliver your impact in the medical field and the accomplishments you guys have made since then. Now let's dive into our first section and talk about your perspectives as physicians in spinal cord injury care, everything from the challenge of treating underserved populations to overcoming systemic barriers, and even what it's like been navigating your careers in this field more specifically. To start, uh, this section of physician perspectives on SCI, Dr. Skelton and Dr. Huang, I wanted to ask, how has mentorship influenced your career, and what advice would you give to other aspiring physicians who want to follow in your footsteps or may feel moved or inspired by your trajectory that you shared?
I can start. Mentorship has been extremely important in my career. And having the research training and the research background that I have, it's something that they really get right. That whole kind of side of the house, I don't know, the graduate school and that sort of thing. It's something that they really get right because mentorship is it's formal, but it's flexible, it's intentional, like there's metrics, tied to it. And it's really not just somebody that says, oh, okay, yeah, I'll come talk to me when you want something. And so I do not know where I would be from some of the if it was not for some of the mentors that I had, go all the way going back from medical school and through residency, through my early career, and now. And it's been really interesting to kind of see how those relationships change and grow. Again, my primary research mentor, went from, I remember literally she would mark up my manuscripts and grant proposals with red pen because she's old school like that and she likes using a red pen to now, we sit, we still meet. We still meet every other week for 30 minutes, which is really it's really neat and so that's really important to me. But now the conversations are very different. Like we start off kind of talking about family and what we did over the weekend and that sort of thing, and then she's asking my opinion, my clinical opinion about spinal cord injury medicine or about a research project that we might be working on, instead of it just being very kind of unidirectional the way that it was before. And so obviously giving back, paying it forward has been really, really important for me. And so mentorship is a really big part of my this current leg of my journey. And you always start before you think you're ready. And so I remember in 2020, someone came to me, one of the fellows in the exact same fellowship that I did was like, hey, I'm a rehab nurse and now I'm looking to do this and that sort of thing. And I'm like, I barely know what I'm doing myself, but sure, come on. And so now we collaborate and, we have projects together and she's gotten a Career Development Award now and is blossoming in her career. And it's like, whoa, where did that come from? Like, I don't know. It just seems like it was, a year ago that I was doing it. So I'm highly, highly um, encourage everyone to find someone out there, find a group of people, because no one person can be everything. You may need mentorship on different things depending on what you want to do, but I'm a big fan of mentorship and have benefited from it greatly.
Yeah, I totally agree and echo, what Felicia is saying. Mentorship has been huge in my journey and career as well. I definitely wouldn't be here without that component. And I think part of my motivation or inspiration for, wanting to get in or back, like to be in academics in my career as an attending was to kind of pay that forward. And something I actually really admire about Dr. Skelton is the way that she's been very kind of intentional and systematic and rigorous about mentorship in a way that I think probably she brings from her research background that maybe that we in clinical medicine don't quite have as much of a roadmap for. But she's definitely kind of been an example of that and has been a huge resource for so many of us and our trainees. So yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that insight. So both of you have risen as leaders in a predominantly male field. And we all know representation is very important. So as women of minority backgrounds, what challenges have you faced in establishing yourselves, and how did you overcome them?
Do you want to go ahead, Donna? I don't have to go first every time.
Sure. I can comment. I think I was just like, okay, I need to like think a little bit about what I would say about this. I mean, I think overall I have been quite lucky. And I think that comes with and has been very largely influenced by what we were just talking about, mentorship. But beyond that, a related but not entirely overlapping concept of sponsorship, which is, you know, finding people that'll talk about you when you're not in the room. So not just having someone that like you can meet with and provides kind of guidance, support, and resources, but additionally someone who's really there to champion you. So I think that has been something that has been really instrumental in me being able to get to the point where I am. You know, in terms of barriers, I think overall, fortunately, it has not manifested in my career in terribly explicit ways. Like there may be ways in which, you know, you kind of experience like sort of like insidious or maybe like microaggression more type of interactions that can of course like wear on you and can and take a toll. But you know, I have not found that, you know, overall to be like an overwhelming barrier thus far in my career. Though certainly I think that may change as I sort of enter into like these next phases and chapters.
Yeah, it's tricky because and the only thing that I would say is that if you're from any sort of underserved background, um, you already heard me say it before once before tonight, and I'm probably going to say it like 30 more times before because it's something you have to be intentional. You have to be extremely intentional about what you are trying to do and what you're trying to accomplish. And I'm not gonna sit here and just be like, "Oh, well, it's me," you know, you have to do all this other stuff, and it's like, I mean, and that's part of it. You just have to be intentional because you're, you know, things may not just kind of fall into your lap the way that they might for someone that's not from an underserved, you know, population. That's just the way it is. But I think you have to, if you have a vision and you have kind of where you're trying to go, you build that kind of team around you. Cannot stress enough how Dr. Wong was saying about sponsorship. It's huge. You know, people that are just gonna, you know, keep talking about you to people, and they're gonna be like, "Huh, what?" You know, like I move in a lot of different circles. I move in like infectious disease circles and like medicine circles and research circles, and I'm like the lonely kind of, you know, physiatrist, SCI person, and like, and they're just like, "Why are you here?" And I'm like, "Because I'm trying to do this. Like I'm trying to do what you're doing. That's why I'm here." And so you just have to be intentional about it. Um, and I say that in that the way you set up your career, the way you do everything. I had a vision of kind of what I wanted my life to look like, and what I wanted to when I was like, you know, in my 20s, super single, no kids, you know, not a care in the world, but I knew kind of what I wanted down the road, so I had to make intentional steps in my career to kind of fashion that as much as I possibly could. And again, you may, again, you can sit and cry about it. You can sit and be like, well, why do I have to do all this extra work? Why can't I just go out and see what happens or whatever? I'm like, well, okay, I mean, you can do that. YOLO. But like, you know, or, as thought, you could just put a little effort and intention behind it. Not everything's going to go according to plan. That's a whole other webinar of life not going according to plan. But you at least have a vision, and you at least have a focus about where you're wanting to go, and then you choose and take steps and take actions to make that the reality. And again, the more underserved populations boxes you check off, maybe the more you have to do that.
Yeah. Well said. I wanted to touch on social determinants of health for a second. How would you say systemic issues like access to technology or socioeconomic status play a role specifically in rehabilitation outcomes, and what changes are needed to improve equity in care in this frontier?
Yeah, I read your list of questions, and I was like, they're really asking the big questions. I think so. I guess to start, socio like social determinants of health hugely impact, as you may imagine, so many facets and aspects that would impact someone's rehabilitation outcomes. Um, for one, a huge um, piece of what determines someone's access to rehabilitation services to begin with is their funding. And that's probably maybe been like top of mind this week with like what the news has been. And so that as you kind of progress, I think one thing that it was perhaps like striking to me in my like journey through rehab was like how striking that was, that it really seemed to be like the make or break for so many decisions that we are making for our patients. How long they stay in rehab, what equipment they can get, what medications they can get, what services they can get, how much caregiver support they can get, kind of really does hugely rely on what insurance they have, and then what just other like money they have. And Dr. Skelton and I work in a VA, which is kind of an interesting little like side like offshoot of the universe where we're somewhat but not entirely protected from that. So you really see some of the contrasts that can exist when you have kind of a good safety net in terms of the insurance kind of funding piece. So definitely that really has a huge impact and creates massive disparities in the types of care that people can receive.
Unfortunately, rehabilitation is considered a luxury. Um, Not only in in most countries, if you're talking about globally, internationally, but I feel like even here in the US, it's not, again, not to get too far in the weeds, healthcare is not really considered a right at all, the way that we're currently structured, and rehabilitation is even less so, less considered a right. It is kind of the ivory tower, so to speak, of medicine, still, which is really, really frustrating. So again, and that's where kind of the work that Dr. Wong and I do is kind of an advocacy, and kind of being a voice of people for people with disabilities, saying, this person has the right to exist as much as anyone. So please provide the services that they need, literally just to exist. We're not asking. We're not asking for much. We just, we need the services that they need to exist. And then more recently, kind of some of the research that I've been doing has been looking at, because you mentioned technology, and I think that's I'm hopeful, I'm optimistic that that is a way that we can address some of the disparities that our population face. Mobility and transportation is huge for a lot of our patients. So why can't we take the healthcare to them? And so looking at telehealth, looking at kind of, virtual reality, which again, if you zoom way in, is kind of a type of telehealth. It's, taking the knowledge, the expertise, the clinician who is in one place, the patient that's in another, and putting them together without having them get in a car, have to have caregivers to get them ready to get into a car, to have money to get gas in the car, have the time to get, because we work with a lot of rural veterans, even here in Houston. A third of the veterans we take care of either live in rural or highly rural veterans, because it doesn't take much once you get outside of, the Houston metropolitan area. And so throw on mobility impairments on top of that, and you've really got, a disparate situation. So how can we leverage technology, which the pandemic kind of forced upon us in a certain way? It was the best thing that came out of the pandemic. How can we now utilize that to provide more equitable care to these patients? So I see, access to telehealth, virtual reality, all that kind of techie stuff as a health equity issue. And I've talked to people about it, and it actually really seems to resonate, which I was like, oh man, that's cool. So, like that, it's really, really neat. And why not? Why not? We have the technology. Why aren't we leveraging it in a way that makes sense? So,
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I'm actually doing my emergency medicine rotation down here in Lake Jackson, and a lot of the patients we see are veterans that end up going to Yale's hospital for care. And the biggest complaint they say is having to go and drive there, and they don't have transportation and things like that. And they're always asking, like, what can y'all do? Like, how can, like, how can we help that? So I guess that's a good transition into our next question. How can healthcare systems address these barriers to provide more equitable care for spinal cord injury patients? And I guess what role does advocacy and policy changes play in the improving care for these groups? Not just veterans, but any other underserved groups that y'all come in contact with.
and so I think healthcare systems have a huge role in addressing these barriers. And I think addressing it at a system level is the only way that will really actually be able to make meaningful change. Um, And so part of that is the policy. They keep kind of doing these temporary extensions again on telehealth. They just came out with the last one. Was fortunate enough to, with one of our specialty societies, be able to go to Capitol Hill in September and talk to legislators. I talked to the legislators in Texas because I went with a kind of Texas contingency and really, really pushed for them to say, hey, can we make this permanent? Unfortunately, they're concerned about fraud, waste, and abuse. And unfortunately, someone has done some research on that, and there may be a smidgen of that happening. So we're going to have to regulate ourselves. We're going to have to police ourselves. But it's definitely something that I think we should invest in if we can do it thoughtfully, if we can do it intentionally. And that as a physiatrist, and as somebody that takes care of people with spinal cord injuries, am going to keep advocating for, because I think our patient population specifically could benefit from it. Does the 20-year-old that, has a cough, do they need 5 telehealth visits for that cough? Maybe not. Maybe not. That's a little overkill. But, I think in complex care management and more complicated patients, I think there's definitely a role for it. And so I would just say that people, again, not to get too far in the weeds, but people are just like, oh, well, I'm not political. I'm not a politician. I don't want to go into it. It's like, but as a physician, you are an advocate. Whether you want to be or not, you're an advocate. You're looked into in pretty much every community that you're in as a leader, as a thought leader, as someone who has experience, who has knowledge, and people are going to take and look and see what you do. So whether you want to be or not, you are, that's your lane. That's your lane. You're not getting out of your lane by kind of speaking up about the things that matter to you. And I would go a step further and say that you perhaps have a responsibility to do so. Um, and I think if we if we keep doing that, and as physiatrists, as rehabilitation medicine, professionals, if we keep doing that for our patient populations, which often get neglected, which are often underserved, we can make meaningful changes for our little neck of the woods. And I can't say, we can't change the world, but we can change our little part of the world. Um, so that's all I'm going to say on that.
Yeah, and I think the only thing I have to add to that is it's kind of actually a good segue because Dr. Skelton mentioned like kind of your neck of the woods. I think often like advocacy can feel very intimidating because you think of like lobbying on Capitol Hill and you're like, well, how do I start? Like, where do I, like, how do I get from here to there? And I sort of like to remind people that your kind of sphere of influence can be like sort of as big or as small as you want or need it to be, but you can still have impact within that. And so something to think about, even if you're not like, okay, I'm not like well versed or comfortable in like policy, capital P per se. One thing to think about, like within your institutions, is that as rehabilitation specialists or as like specialists in people living with disabilities, you have a huge role to play in education and advocacy, just even like in your like micro environment. Um, Even though, hospital facilities are required to be ADA compliant, ADA is like literally just a box to check for most people. And accessibility is like so much more than that. And you'll encounter this like as soon as you start looking, you'll find like the many very like pernicious ways in which hospital spaces, hospital policies and practices are not like inclusively designed and unintentionally and exclude and harm people. And so, I think about this a lot in the ways in which it like directly impacts like my patients and spinal cord injury. But more broadly, if you kind of think about doing things like through that lens, you really actually kind of make it better for everyone. Sort of like the idea of like curb cuts. Like for a while, we didn't have curb cuts in the sidewalk. And then like once they did it, it was like, oh, wow, like it's helpful for people, not just who use wheelchairs, but who need to like push a stroller up onto the sidewalk or who might have like a cart full of stuff, like it doesn't just benefit like the target group necessarily that you're thinking about. So um, I would say, yeah, there's a huge role, even just kind of keeping your eyes open to that in your environment and sort of speaking up, providing education and trying to like provide solutions, creative solutions and problem solving where you can.
Yeah, fantastic points. Thank you. And I think there's a lot of important nuances there: equitable resource allocation, educational equity, in addition to health equity, owning our role as advocates and the power that that holds, and starting in our neck of the woods and embracing our microenvironments and building from there. Building upon that, what are some of the most promising innovations or emerging modalities in spinal cord injury care today? And how would you say these advances are maybe transforming traditional treatment paradigms in spinal cord injury? And how do you envision these developments influencing the future here in this field and improving patient outcomes?
So I'm going to maybe have like a bit of a like strange or unpopular take with regards to this. I I personally believe I don't necessarily know if it's like the new modalities that we need. In a way, on one hand, I think it's like we really so far our system is like failing our patients in like the essentials, and maybe it's like innovative, I guess, supposed to think of like how we can actually like provide those things. Um, so I think over time I have become maybe like more focused and excited on ways to do that, ways to really just, ensure we're providing like quality care across the board and equitably and thoughtfully for patients with disabilities within the context of the parameters and the resources that we have. And maybe like less excited about bells and whistles. And I feel like that makes me sound like a real Scrooge, but I think you like you start practice and you just notice the ways in which like those kind of basics are like so needed. That being said, and I think maybe like Dr. Skelton can definitely speak way more to this. There are exciting opportunities in the realm of, um, you know, telehealth, virtual reality, and those types of modalities that can provide better access to our patients.
No, I don't think what you said was like unpopular at all. Like, I mean, that it starts with the basics and it starts with the essentials. Like, that's absolutely 110% true. I mean, can we leverage, I don't know, can we leverage technology to help do those essential things better? Maybe. We're just gonna have to try. We just have to try and again be intentional about saying that, hey, we need to make changes here, and this is how we're gonna go about it. Um, but the reason I say that technology is really kind of interesting in our patient population is because it's so heterogeneous. And as you will realize as you go through your training in medical school and rehabilitation, there aren't a whole bunch of randomized controlled trials, in people in rehab populations in general, and spinal cord injury medicine in particular, because it is so heterogeneous. And we pride ourselves on that. It's like, oh, we treat each, every patient is special and different. And, you have to have that. And it's like, okay, yeah, yes, when you're at the bedside, when you're at the set, but can we leverage things like, and again, this is where my nerd's gonna kind of come out, but I don't care, I don't care, I don't care. Can we leverage things like artificial intelligence and machine learning to look at these very heterogeneous populations in a new way? Can we come up with some kind of broad concepts from these patients, using these modality that aren't amenable to, your classic kind of randomized controlled trial? That's what's exciting to me. Like, I think that that's really cool. And if we can kind of leverage that again and not go like completely Skynet, because we're in it. Like, we are past the date where the machines became sentient in Terminator. We're in it. We're there. So if we can, harness that for good and not for evil, and not have the robots kind of take over the world, like, I really, again, it goes back to an equity issue. You don't ever want to take the human element out of healthcare, but sometimes you want to take the human element out of healthcare, because we know that we can make it more fair, we can make it more equitable, we can make it more objective. And so again, as long as we do that thoughtfully, I'm excited about where some of that stuff can go.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Yeah, I've definitely seen the stuff about robots helping us, fold our laundry and clean our dishes and stuff, but definitely utilizing them in these ways would be, or any sort of AI or those advancements would definitely be really cool to see. So definitely thank you both for sharing your insights. Hearing how y'all dealt with challenges and worked to improve equity is really inspiring, especially how you, I guess, dealt to tailor those approaches to different underserved communities. So with that being said, we're going to kind of shift into our next part, which is patient perspective and collaboration. And we're all curious to hear more about how you've built those strong relationships with your patients, and how to keep their voices central in their care. So our first question is, how do you ensure a patient-centered approach in spinal, and I know you've answered this a little bit, but how do you ensure a patient-centered approach in spinal cord injury care, and especially when working with individuals from diverse backgrounds?
Um, oh,
Oh,
were
go
you
ahead.
gonna go down?
Oh.
So for me, I think it's, again, I've said it, like a broken record. It's just being really intentional about what each kind of interaction that I have with the patient and with my team for that member. Sorry, I heard maniacal laughing behind me. And I think my 2-year-old is like doing something crazy. Okay, but anywho, like I think, there's ethical principles that guide everything that we do. If you haven't come across them already, you will come across them. And the biggest ethical principle that kind of guides everything that I do in medicine is autonomy. Is that if I say that this person is a autonomous adult with the capacity to make choices about their health care, as long as I provide them with the education, and that's huge. I spend so much time like trying to educate my patients about this, that, and the third, and their options. But then I have to allow them to make a choice, even if it's not the choice that I would make. And I have to be very, very careful about not imposing my values, my will, my cultural background, my upbringing on the choices that they might make about their healthcare and about their lives. And it's hard. It's really, really hard. It sounds easy, but it is extremely, extremely difficult. But it's well worth doing, And I can sleep at night and I feel very, very comfortable about every decision that I make. Well, most decisions that I make as an attending, because I follow that principle. It's like, hey, I educated, I gave the person the options, I told them, I made a recommendation. I did that as compassionately and as with much empathy as I could. And if they chose to go another way, if they chose to not do something else, then I'm okay. And my motto has been, it's like what you're not changing, you're choosing, and may your choices reflect your hopes and not your fears. Um, and it sounds, fluffy and nice to say, but it's really, really hard. It's really, really hard because you then sit by and watch people kind of choose over and over again, kind of to do some really interesting things. So, um,
Yeah. Felicia and I, Dr. Skelton and I, obviously, we work at the same hospital, at the same setting, and overlap a lot of patients. So I can deeply relate to what she's talking about. But yes, I think autonomy is the biggest thing. And like layered within that, I think it is important to have a kind of awareness and a sensitivity to historically the way in which medicine has been. I mean, medicine traditionally is quite paternalistic, but especially so to people with disabilities. And so I think just like the more I like learn about that and kind of like contextualize what we're doing, it really helps me kind of be like, okay, like how am I contributing to this ecosystem in a way that is like minimizing harm? So like the autonomy piece and like the doing no harm. Coming from frankly a legacy that has like done a lot of harm to like this particular population of people. So I think that's something that like has helped me just sort of like place myself in this kind of like universe. So even though it is like a huge like bummer to read about, you should like learn about kind of the history of medicine in this context. I think it's important. And then it really is like any patient, you try your best to understand them as an individual and their values and their goals, and then help to provide information that will allow them to make choices that are aligned with those values. um, and yeah, that's the name of the game. And yeah, kind of taking yourself out of it, and your own, like what you would choose really isn't relevant so much in that situation.
Yeah. Going from upholding patient autonomy and minimizing harm in the context of disability care and even revamping precedent if need be to achieve that goal, I want to dovetail into what strategies do you use to navigate conversations about long-term expectations and realistic outcomes for patients who are dealing with so much uncertainty and loss of activities of daily living functionality? That might be a little bit difficult to set those outcomes and might be at odds with what they expect in the context of their care. Have you encountered particular cultural or linguistic considerations when treating diverse populations that affect the setting of these expectations and realistic outcomes?
um, So again, there's a couple of different pieces in that question, I think. As far as for navigating conversations about long-term outcomes and realistic expectations, this is something I do pretty commonly, because of my role. And so I take care, which I guess I should have talked about like way back at the beginning, but anywho. So I oversee the folks that are enrolled on our home care program, which is it's called home-based primary care, which is pretty unique to the VA, mostly because it's super expensive and nobody else is willing to pay for it, but I digress. Um, but it's basically the idea of that you have a population at home in the community, but only marginally so. And so they need kind of extra resources and case management to try to keep them at home. And so everyone that has a new injury, they go through kind of inpatient rehabilitation with Dr. Wong and the inpatient docs. That can be any length of time, kind of depending on what's going on. And then if they live, within 100 miles of the Houston VA, they get discharged to the home care program. And so I see them kind of either, right after they've got out of the hospital, and again, sometimes up to a year, sometimes up to a very long time after they've gotten out of the hospital. But I'm talking about kind of that subacute period where, again, we talk, we in that, especially that kind of year or year and a half, 2 years after spinal cord injury, we kind of know prognostically kind of what you have around then is what you're gonna have. And so having conversations with patients when they come in for their visits, um, you know, still asking for physical therapy and occupational therapy, even when they were in the hospital for like a year, getting occupational therapy and physical therapy. And there's no kind of objective reason that I think that that's going to change their function. Um, but they're so fixated on, if I could just do something, if I can just do something, I can kind of change what's happening in my life right now because there's this kind of inherent uncomfortableness with where they're at. And so something that I've found is that's very helpful in kind of having those kind of long-term discussions and realistic expectations is kind of the whole grief and loss model. Having a spinal cord injury, having any sort of catastrophic disability is a type of death. It's a type of loss. You have to grieve, you have to mourn, you have to do whatever it is. And I think this is a really great way to kind of bring in cultural sensitivities because every culture has some sort of grief ritual. Every single culture. And so can they draw on that? Can they draw on that to say, hey, you have to grieve the life that you used to have. I can't magically take your spinal cord injury away. Like everything that I know about spinal cord injury is saying kind of this is where we're at. I never say never and I never say always, but we kind of have to start focusing on where we're at now and being in the here and now and kind of deciding what the rest of your life is going to look like. And there's usually lots of tears involved. Those are very, very emotional, kind of heavy conversations to have with folks. But it's probably one of the most rewarding things I do because I get to just kind of hold space for it. I get to hold space as their physician and kind of provide them with the medical knowledge and the expertise. But just as a person, I get to just be like, yeah, that sucks. Cry, throw things, shout, whatever you need to do. But again, how are we going to grieve? How are we going to grieve? How are we going to mourn this loss, but then eventually get to the acceptance of it and move on with the rest of your life? And that's the fun part. That's the fun part. That's the rewarding part. And if you can get somebody to that place and engage them on that level and get them to that place, you can, it changes their health trajectory as well, not only just kind of the general trajectory of their life. So,
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think one thing, well, so I am kind of on the scene, as Dr. Skelton mentioned, a little bit earlier in the process generally because I do exclusively inpatient medicine, though we also have a kind of unique model here where our patients, once you have a spinal cord injury, pretty much exclusively get readmitted to our service, even if it's not for a spinal cord injury related issue per se, including like medical surgical issues. So I get to see people sort of longitudinally as well as in that sort of initial phase after their injury. And, I think particularly in the setting where rehab length of stay is extremely like restricted by insurance, there's this sort of like feeling that like, well, it's like I have to get the patient to like accept like what's happened to them for the very practical purpose of like they need to like do rehab and like move on. But I think like it's important to kind of like separate um, sort of that practical piece of needing to learn how to do things, get to a place where it's like safe to be outside of the hospital, and that sort of emotional, very personal and highly individualized process of grieving their former self, and accepting to whatever degree that means to that person their new reality. And the other thing I think that can be kind of difficult initially, kind of as you're getting into this, is that you know patients don't come with like a neat little like hero's journey, right? you're not necessarily going to get that like nice, neat arc. It's messy naturally, like everyone's lives, and like you may never see acceptance, and you don't necessarily need that so long as the person is engaged at a reasonable level to what they need to do in that inpatient phase. And you know, in our setting, we're lucky in that we have a little bit of flexibility with time, so we can kind of meet people where they are to a greater extent. But it can be helpful in that stage to really just focus on like literally putting one foot in front of the other, or taking like each next incremental like moving on to each next incremental phase, as opposed to really being focused on like prognosticating, unless a patient is like really, really curious to know. But frankly, most of them are not, you know. um, they don't like ask like, well, like what percentage of people, like most people just kind of aren't thinking in those terms at that point. And so, yeah, I think I have generally found it most helpful to just focus on, okay, like what are the things that need to happen, and trying to kind of sketch out what life outside the hospital is going to look like, on sort of like a very practical and more granular level, while, you know, kind of supporting them through the emotional process of grieving.
Again, thank you guys so much for sharing your insights. It's clear that these considerations play a role in delivering the equity and compassionate care that you both obviously practice in your everyday. Building upon everything we just heard, we'd like to open the floor for any audience questions. Feel free to drop the questions in the chat or raise your hand. Danyal and I will work to moderate and direct them to our speakers. Matthew?
Hey there, can you hear me? Awesome. So one question I had partially was answered, but I was kind of curious just for the VA versus the civilian population. I was kind of curious on what the disparities look like in both populations, what some of the needs are comparatively in each of those populations, and what might be expected uh, concerns as residents also that we might be seeing in that capacity when working with them.
Yeah, that's a really good question. Um, because it's the veteran population, it has its unique challenges. Um, it the VA hospital, the system of care is a safety net kind of system. Uh, a lot of folks get their care, and especially when it comes to spinal cord injury medicine at the VA, because it is cost prohibitive to get it other places. So that just kind of start there. It's really, really hard to live independently with a spinal cord injury in our current healthcare environment because it's so expensive. The VA, that being said, provides certain resources for DME, especially wheelchairs, all the equipment that people might need at home. To a certain extent, kind of caregiver services. There's some unique programs that go through that are sponsored through the VA that make it a little bit more tenable, but it's still difficult. But then you throw on the population that has a high prevalence of mental health conditions, including depression, PTSD, substance use disorder, um, and inherent mistrust of kind of the healthcare system that stems from their active duty days. They actively are told to kind of minimize their healthcare problems, to minimize being broken. Like that's literally a term. I come from a military family, and they're like, you don't want to be labeled as broken because you can wash out, you get kicked out, and that sort of thing. So they fight really hard to not be broken. And so there's this kind of constant kind of tension between actually acknowledging that they need help and need kind of the care that they need. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. Eat your Wheaties every morning because you have lots of challenges to face. That being said, I love doing rehab medicine and spinal cord injury medicine in the VA system because I talk to my colleagues, I talk to my friends that are out in civilian land, and it's even harder. It's even harder just because a lot of the resources that I have access to aren't there. Um, so it's tough. It's tough either way that you go. You will learn a lot about the healthcare system, the whole systems-based learning that they preach to you, as one of your competencies. You will learn it in spades on your rehab rotations and spinal cord injury medicine because it's real life. It's not just something that you have to think about. You have to think about how that person is going to go home and do everything that you're telling them to do in the hospital and do everything that you're telling them to do in the clinic, how they practically are going to get that done. So it's a great learning experience, even if you don't go into rehabilitation medicine. But it's the bulk of what we do. It's just trying to figure out how we're going to help the patient kind of navigate that landscape.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. Um, Dr. Skelton pretty much highlighted the main uh, sort of unique aspects of the veteran population. And, in the VA, I think it really highlights actually just how much of a gap between like what we have and what we need there is, because in the VA, you get a lot more than outside of the VA, yet it really is still never enough, particularly as it comes to caregiver support, transportation, and I would say caregiver support and transportation are sort of the two biggest things that really prevent our patients from staying well, because they can get their meds, they can get their equipment, but like living in the community, that becomes like a really big piece of it, because if you don't have a caregiver, you don't have transportation, that like limits you from so many things, socializing, working, all those various things. So um, yeah, I mean, I think it really highlights the need. Um, Interestingly, I think the veteran population is also unique in that like they kind of have like this ability to form, I think, more community, frankly, because it's like they already had this shared identity of as veterans, and then they sustain a spinal cord injury, and that has also like created and congealed like a group of people, and as a result, um, I think veterans with spinal cord injury have become like a really powerful force for advocacy within like the whole ecosystem. An example being the Paralyzed Veterans of America. They're a veteran service organization comprised of, patients essentially, but they heavily influence and interact with kind of how the healthcare system operates. And I think that's a configuration that you don't really find, in the outside world. And so I think there is something unique about like the veteran population that has really allowed them to sort of like band together and really create, a much more sort of like influence within the system.
Thank you both very much. I appreciate it.
I know we're running short on time, so I just answered the one question in the chat. But um, Rhoda and Danielle, are you going to share our contact information with the attendees? I give you the permission to share mine. And then so if anybody wants to, have follow-up conversations or email me. Um, my goal is to get back with you within the week. If you don't hear back from me within a week, charge it to my head and not my heart. It just got lost. But that's my goal, is to try to answer emails within a week.
Yeah, same. Y'all are totally welcome to share my email as well.
I'm gonna drop them in the chat, and whoever else may not get it, y'all can definitely reach out to me on GroupMe or anything like that. Hannah, did you have a question by chance before we end? I know you turned your camera on.
It was more, I just kind of joined late, but it was more of just asking if you guys took volunteers or like shadowers. I'm just a first year medical student and just kind of want to get exposed to things. And I'm interested in PMNR, but I just wanted to see if that was an option. But I could also send an email and ask some questions about that as well.
Yeah, because that's a very nuanced question. There's lots of regulatory hurdles that have to be um, reached to do that. Where are
Yeah.
you located right now?
I'm in Conroe, so I'm at Sam
Okay. At
Houston
Sam
State.
Houston. Okay.
Mhm.
Do we have a partnership with them, Donna?
Not that I know of.
Yeah.
Like we're working through with another trainee now. We have mechanisms to figure that out, but definitely if you're interested and you have a bit of a stomach for red tape, we are happy to try to like problem solve that with you.
Okay.
So
Okay.
the answer is not no, but definitely it takes a little
Yeah.
of legwork.
Process. Okay, perfect. Well, I can just send an email, so that's perfect.
Yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely love to have Sam Houston have a partnership with y'all, but thank you for that. So since in the interest of time, thank you all for such an engaging and thought-provoking discussion tonight. Just amazing to hear from both the incredible Dr. Skelton and Dr. Huang, just giving us your expertise and willingness to talk to some medical students on a Monday night was just incredible. So thank you guys so much.
Absolutely echo that. And just want to express the utmost gratitude to you guys for sharing your insights and experiences. It's been an honor, nothing short of an honor to host this event. We hope everyone leaves tonight feeling energized and inspired and more informed about the importance of equity and innovation in spinal cord injury care and the important work leaders like Dr. Wong and Skelton are doing in this area.
Thanks for having us. Y'all did a really great job. Again, I've been on webinars that were way less professionally moderated than the job that y'all did. So kudos to you.
Yeah,
Thank you. That means so much.
I need to bring my A game. So thank you guys so much.
We look forward to any future events, but everybody have a great evening and thank you for everybody who
All right.
attended.
Y'all take care.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.